Paige Bergfeld was a 34-year-old single mom of 3. She became the sole provider after she went through her second divorce and was left with a $1 million home with a $6,000 mortgage to pay for in Grand Junction, Colorado. Paige had become creative by opening up a dance class studio called Brain Dance, along with selling nursing slings to new mothers and becoming a Pampered Chef MLM rep. She was the perfect target for a multi-level marketing company because of the vulnerable state that she was in as a single mom in a horrible financial situation. However, she would quickly climb to the top of the MLM. Paige would disappear on June 28, 2007. The car that Paige drove would be found just a few days later up in flames with only a few clues. Later, a search would go underway where they would find some of her belongings that would shock her family and friends. Paige was living a double life. She was a soccer mom by day and an escort by night. Her remains would not be found until 2012. Paige's murderer would be brought to justice in 2016, over 9 years after she went missing in 2007. This is the case of a mom who was just trying to provide for her children and give them a good life. This is the case of Paige Bergfeld. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLM life and some true crime content here on this channel. So if any of that interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to stick around. In today's video, if you watch the intro, we will be discussing the case of Paige Bergfeld. The reason why I wanted to talk about this case is because a ton of you sent me a video by Kendall Rae here on YouTube. I have never come across her channel before. I binge watched all of her other videos and I subscribed. I am obsessed with her videos. I did not watch her Paige Bergfeld video only because whenever I'm doing any kind of true crime case, I prefer to watch documentaries or interviews, something like that, instead of watching a content creator because I don't want my opinion to be skewed or for, I guess you could say, my script to also be skewed by watching another content creator. So I will be watching her video as soon as I'm done filming and editing this particular video of mine. Because of this video and just a few things that I discussed in it, I did want to say that this is based on some of my opinions along with the research that I did, information that is readily available to me and also to the public, but I do always encourage everyone to do their own research. If you are new to my channel, like I said in the beginning, I do a lot, predominantly most of my channel is anti-MLM. MLM stands for multi-level marketing, and that is in case you're new. But that is the reason why I wanted to jump into this case, because she was an MLM rep. So without further ado, let's just get into the case of Paige Bergfeld. Paige was born on April 27th, 1973. Paige lived in Denver, Colorado. I have read a ton of articles about Paige Bergfeld and how she was a very family-oriented type of a person. She knew from a very young age that she did want to eventually have a family in the future. She did want children. She would go on to meet Ron Biegler, and they were teenage sweethearts. Paige did have very big, I guess you could say, dreams when she was in high school, and she did want to go to school. She got a 4-year scholarship for nursing at the University of Florida, and Ron Biegler would end up following her to the University of Florida because, like I said, they were teenage sweethearts. And as the time went by, unfortunately, Paige's grades just started to drop and they started to fail. So that is when Paige decided that she was going to drop out of school. Her and Ron would end up moving back to Colorado, and then in 1995 is when they would get married. It was later said that Ron was Paige's first love. I have seen her father talk about this in interviews, saying that it was just, like I said, this was her first true love and they had a very special relationship. In 1995, though, Paige did work at a strip club called the Mile High Saloon, and her stage name was Madison. However, eventually things would take a turn because remember how I talked about how Paige really truly wanted a family? She really wanted to have children. Unfortunately, Ron did not share that same exact feeling, I guess you can say, or decision, because that is a very big decision. But at the time, he didn't even know if he wanted to be a father. So this would in turn put a strain on their relationship. And unfortunately, in the end, in 1997, they would end up getting divorced. After their divorce, Paige would end up working at the strip club again. And this is where she would meet her second husband, Rob Dixon. She liked the fact that Rob Dixon was a very family-oriented person, just like herself, and that he did express that he did want to have children. And another thing was that Rob Dixon was very wealthy. He was very well off. This was his family's money. His family came into, I guess you could kind of say they lucked out because they had investments in early technology for cell phones, and because of that, they just had a ton of money. They were very, very wealthy, and Rob was one of those people who really truly loved to spend his father's money. Rob did have a job, so it's not like he was just sitting around and being a lazy bum and just spending mommy and daddy's money. He did have a job as an emergency medical technician, and a lot of friends of his would say that he didn't really have to have a job. He had his family's fortune, but he decided to have this job anyway. And of course, because of all of this, Paige knew that she would be very well taken care of, and they would live the high life. Rob did shower Paige with very expensive gifts. There was one necklace that he paid $12,000 for, along with the engagement ring that he would use to propose to Paige was $85,000. They lived a very flashy life in a very small town. The small town that I'm referencing is Grand Junction, Colorado. So a little bit later, I'll talk about the year that they got married, but the year that they got married is actually when they moved to Grand Junction, Colorado. He even had a yellow Ferrari, and there was an interview that I was watching, or a documentary, I guess you can say, and someone said that he was driving this flashy yellow Ferrari in a town full of pickup trucks, which there's nothing wrong if you have a pickup truck or anything like that, but when you go from a small town where everyone's driving very modest cars or working vehicles or anything like that, and then you see a bright yellow Ferrari, it just doesn't really mix. And there was another thing too that a journalist said in an interview, that they were living this champagne life in a six-pack town. So that's just to give you an idea of just how wealthy they were. In 1998, they would end up getting married with that $85,000 engagement ring, which I think is absolutely insane. And by 2001, they would have 3 children. They did buy a house that was priced at $1 million, and their mortgage was $6,000 a month. However, a lot of this would come crashing down because Rob was, I would say he was kind of a risk taker when it came to finances, and he invested all of his family money into some kind of thing that he was doing. I couldn't find exactly what it was, but he lost all of that money. And because of losing all of this money, unfortunately, he had to file for bankruptcy. And of course, this put a huge strain on the family, both financially and emotionally. I mean, can you imagine going from living in a home that you could afford, that the mortgage was $6,000 a month, you have all of these fancy gifts, you have all of this money, and all of a sudden it's all gone? That would be very, very stressful, and that would be very strenuous on both of them. And of course, Paige was really distraught over this. In October 2004, Paige would call 911 on her husband, Rob Dixon, and the phone call went like this.
911, where's your emergency?
My husband and I were in a fight. He wanted the children to stay with him, and he said that I would come home and find them all murdered.
What's your name, ma'am?
Paige Dixon.
When police did arrive on the scene, of course, there were no reports or charges or anything like that that was filed, because both Rob and Paige had told officers that there's no problem, we worked it out, there's no issue, everything is fine, and everything of that nature. Rob would go on to say a little bit later that he thought that Paige was maybe possibly, allegedly, doing this as a way to make him look like the bad guy, because of course they were going through a lot of financial troubles, and he thought that maybe she was trying to keep a record, so to speak, or allegedly, do I have to say that, to make him look like this bad guy that has these bad financial decisions. Now he's having issues with his wife and everything of that nature. And Paige's father would go on to later say that there was 2 different Robs. There was the bad Rob and the good Rob. So the bad Rob was the one that was spending money like crazy, making really bad investment deals and everything like that. And then there was the good Rob who was a big family guy. He loved his family, and he showered his family with gifts and everything like that. Like I said, no charges were filed, but then about a year later in 2005 is when charges would be filed because Paige had called 911 on her husband yet again. This time around, Rob Dixon was arrested and charged with domestic violence, misdemeanor child abuse, and third-degree assault. He would take a plea bargain and he would plead guilty. He would get court-ordered anger management, and then eventually the charges were just completely dropped. With all of this going on, Paige's father, Frank, decided that he was going to open up this, he called it like a getaway fund, and it was a separate bank account where he would put money in there for Paige and for her children as a just in case, because at this point, of course, there were charges filed that he was being abusive. And the thing is that, again, Rob still denies all of it to this day, and he says that he would never lay a hand on Paige, but a lot of her family, they were concerned about her. So like I said, Paige's father opened up this fund where if she needed to just get up and leave one day with the kids, she had enough money to do so. After all of this, in 2006, Rob Dixon and Paige would end up getting a divorce, and he would end up moving to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Paige would later confide in her friends and let them know that she was concerned for her safety. She was concerned for the safety of her children as well, because Rob had almost, in a way, I guess you can say in a way, he became like a loose cannon, according to Paige. And she was just worried for the children. It was a very unhealthy and toxic situation for them to be in. But with all of this, there came this time where now Paige is stuck with this $1 million home with a mortgage of $6,000 a month, and her now ex-husband, Rob, was only sending $500 a month in child support. So Paige had to become very creative on ways to provide for her family. And as I've said multiple times, she put her children first. She would do anything for her children. So she had to become creative. She ended up having multiple different endeavors, one of which was a dance class studio that offered dance classes. They did recitals. She did also make all the costumes for the toddlers, and it was called Brain Dance. So she always really wanted to be surrounded by children, and she loved this. On top of that as well, she did sell nursing slings for new mothers. Then we move on to Pampered Chef, and she was a Pampered Chef MLM rep. If you are not familiar with Pampered Chef or the MLM industry whatsoever, just to say it, I am very anti multi-level marketing. And Pampered Chef is a multi-level marketing company, and it's shaped in a triangle-like structure. I do have merch that says triangle-like structure on it, thanks to one of you guys. But it is shaped in a triangle-like structure. A lot of times you'll hear it be compared to pyramid schemes. A lot of times people will call it, in their opinion, a product-based pyramid scheme, because even though there is a product, there is a very large focus on recruitment. And that is how you will really rank advance in these companies, and how you can get to that tippy top of that 1%, sometimes less than 1% of people that are really making the big bucks in these companies. And that's very apparent when you look at their income disclosure statements. But Pampered Chef sells kitchen, I guess you could say kitchen supplies, kitchenware, so a lot of different kitchen things. And so, of course, she was really good at selling Pampered Chef, and she quickly ranked to the top, to the point where she received a free trip. A lot of people call it a free trip, but us in the anti-MLM community, we know that it's not a free trip. There is a process that you have to go through. There is a lot of rank advancement that you have to go to in order to get these free trips or the free cars. I did an entire video dedicated to the free car scam that a lot of these people say. But anyway, she did make it to the top of Pampered Chef. Paige was the perfect target for an MLM company because she was a single mom at this point. She wanted to stay at home with her children, and at the same time, she was in a financial hole. She was left with all of this that she had to pay for, plus raise 3 children. So she was a very easy target. And back in the day, You got to remember this is in the early 2000s. So right now with the MLM industry, you'll get a lot of hey hun messages is what we call them. And it'll be through social media. You'll go to these like Facebook parties, and that's kind of how they do it now. But back in the day, they would hold these in-home parties. So if you remember, if you remember your mom having Mary Kay parties or having the Mary Kay lady come over and have like a little get together for the girls kind of a thing, that's what Paige would do. She would set up these parties for people, and she was very good at doing it. I mean, judging by what her friends have said and judging by just different things that I've read online about her, she was a very charming person. She was a very, I guess you could say, outgoing person, a loving person. So it's just, it's obvious why she was able to make it to the top, and also probably because there was no market saturation in her area, because a lot of times there is this issue with market saturation. But let's get back into the case because I've talked way too much about the MLM portion. On June 22nd of 2007, Paige did end up confiding in one of her friends and telling one of her friends that she was a little concerned for her safety, that she was just a little worried for Rob, and because I guess there was some kind of issue going on with that. And her friend comforted Paige and said everything's going to be fine and that don't worry about it. Everything is okay. And then on June 28th of 2007, Paige called a friend and let them know that she was really happy. She was really excited. And it was because she had rekindled her relationship with her first husband, Ron Biegler. And on that particular day, they were meeting halfway. He lived in Denver, she lived in Grand Junction. So they decided that they were going to meet halfway in Eagle, Colorado. They decided to go to a rest stop and they had a picnic there. After this, they went back to their towns, and that would be the last time that he would see or speak with Paige. Ron would end up having some kind of a phone conversation with Paige. They talked at about 9 p.m. and Paige has said that she was almost home. He had told her that he's approaching Denver and that he's almost home. But that would be the last time, the absolute last time that he would talk to her. And by 11 p.m., her children were calling her as well, and because they were worried. They did have a babysitter, so they were not by themselves, but her children, her 8-year-old at the time, called her and left her a voicemail, just really concerned for why she's not home yet. And then that's when her father started calling her. Both her first and second husband or ex-husbands were calling her. Her friend Carol had called her and left voicemails. Everyone was very, very concerned. On Saturday, June 30th of 2007 is when a family friend had taken Paige's oldest daughter she was 8 years old at the time, took them to the sheriff's department, the Mesa County Sheriff's Department, to file a missing persons report. At this point in time, the sheriff's department, they did call Paige's father and let him know that she's missing at this point. There was this report filed, and her father packed his bags and decided to drive 200 miles from home to go to Grand Junction and be with the family and help with the investigation. Paige's father, Frank, would call her brother Craig to let him know what's going on, and Craig would go on to later say that his father was inconsolable and he was just really upset, and he hadn't seen his father cry since he was little, and his father was crying. He was really worried about Paige. Then Frank would say that once he arrived in Grand Junction that evening, that at approximately 9:30 p.m. is when they had bloodhounds on the ground. And Paige's father and her mother would say that something was wrong. There's no way that Paige would leave her children. She wouldn't just up and leave, because some people were saying that either she could have disappeared or maybe she just decided to leave. But Frank and Susie were saying that there's no way that Paige would just leave her children. She loves those children. She would do anything for them. So that's when they knew that this was a crime. At the time of all of this happening, investigators did not know that Rob Dixon was Paige's second husband. They found out that she was married previously, and that's when they were able to get the information that Ron Biegler and Paige had met up halfway the night that she disappeared. And that is when he became a person of interest. So they started to look into him a little bit. He would eventually be ruled out because they were able to find cell phone records, and they were able to see that when he called her that night, or when he talked to her on the phone that night at 9 p.m., the night that she disappeared, it pinged off of a cell phone tower in Denver. So they knew that there was absolutely no way that he could have been involved because he was all the way in Denver. Paige's family had this feeling that Ron Beegler didn't have anything to do with the disappearance of Paige, and this was before he was ruled out as a person of interest, but they just had this feeling because he cared so much about her and they knew how distraught he was over her disappearance. So they decided to start their own investigation and their own search. But during all of this happening, her brother, Craig, who lived in Seattle, he was a plastic surgeon in Seattle. He was a plastic surgeon for the reconstruction of children's faces. And he decided that he was going to move his entire family to Grand Junction, Colorado, to take care of Paige's children, to kind of give them the most loving home that they could possibly have, to try to give them the most normal, and I put that in air quotes because how normal can it possibly be at a time like this, but they tried their hardest to be able to take care of her children and just give them a family and a loving home, and to know that they're not alone in this world and everything of that nature. On July 1st of 2007, just a couple of days after Paige had disappeared, at approximately 10 p.m., police responded to a 911 call about a car that was just up in flames in a parking lot. This would end up being a red Ford Focus, and it was the car that Paige was driving.
911, where's your emergency?
Hi, I'm at the corner of 23 and Logos, and there is a car on fire in the parking lot.
Do you see flames or smoke?
Yeah, there's a lot of flames, but there's nobody around that I could see.
So of course, a lot of the evidence was burned because you can't really get too much evidence once it's all been burned up in flames. And there was an interview with one of the officers, one of the investigators, saying that that was an indication that this was a crime, that there was something that was happening, because you don't just burn a car, especially for a person that's been missing. This is someone trying to cover up their tracks. So when they started investigating a little bit further, they found a few things that were a little bit just odd and out of the ordinary. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back as if someone who was really tall had been driving the car. And Paige was 5'4", so she wasn't tall enough for that. But because they were investigating, they decided to ask one of their own people if they could just sit in the car and see if they could reach the pedals, because they were the same exact height as Paige. And when this woman sat in the car, she could not reach the pedals. So that is when investigators knew that if this seat was pushed back because someone was driving, the person that was driving was a very tall person, and it was not Paige. Investigators would end up also looking through the rest of the car, and they looked through the trunk. In the trunk was Paige's planner. And because of the heat, and I guess from the flames and just the melting of everything, the plastic that surrounded the planner, it almost melted and like laminated the planner and the pages and everything. But investigators would end up finding out that the last 4 days were ripped out of her planner. So of course this was suspicious, and they started looking into it a little bit further. But Paige's body was not found in the car. So they were again at a dead end because they only had a few clues, a few pieces to the puzzle. It wasn't enough for them to be able to really point in a specific direction. Which brings me to the massive search that would go underway. This search was led by a woman named Connie Fluke. She would go on to say that they had approximately 150 to 220 volunteers every single day looking for Paige. A lot of these people, they were either friends and family, or some were people that didn't know her. They just wanted to help. She would say that they did find a lot of things, a lot of her belongings, but when someone had said to her that it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, and she said, yeah, except the only thing is that there's a lot of needles that we found in this haystack. So there was a lot of things that were just scattered, and one of which was found on accident by someone who had gotten a flat tire, and they decided to pull over to the side of the road on the highway, and they had found Paige's checkbook, which was kind of weird because why would you find her checkbook? And then of course throughout that area they were able to find more of her belongings, and that included a Blockbuster card. It also included I believe it was the health insurance cards of her children, her personal and her business checkbooks. These are things that you don't just get rid of. These are things that you would think to shred because it's account numbers, it's personal information, and I mean, not the Blockbuster card, but everything else, it's information. And they would stumble across a bunch of her business cards that had the name Models Incorporated on it, or Models Inc. on it. And this next part of the video, I just want to say, please do not pass judgment on Paige. She was just a mom who is trying to provide for her children. So I do want to make it a point to just remember that and realize that she was in a really, really terrible situation and she was just trying to make ends meet. Before we proceed, I do just want to add a quick little note. Some people were saying that they thought that maybe Paige was trying to leave some kind of a trail for anyone to be able to find her and just to show what direction she was going in or anything like that. So a lot of people were saying that allegedly maybe she was throwing things out the window. But moving along to the business cards that they found for Models Inc. Investigators would end up looking into this a little bit further. They also took a look at a bunch of her cell phone records, that kind of a thing. And they found out that Models Inc. was her double life. Paige was living a double life that very few people knew about. She was a soccer mom by day and an escort by night. This was so that she could provide for her family and put food on the table. They would end up finding out that Paige went by the name Carrie. And her sister-in-law, there was an article that I read where her sister-in-law, Callie, ended up saying that she had this feeling that maybe Paige got this idea for this escort business because back in the day when she was younger, Paige told her sister-in-law that she was making $400,000 a year by working at a strip club. And so there was one point in time where she just asked flat out, where are you getting all of this money from on a dance teacher's salary? There's no way that you're able to upkeep all of this. So Callie was thinking that maybe with all of these things and with Paige's past that possibly she got the idea for this escort business. People who knew about Paige's escort business along with some of her clients would go on to say that she had this line that would not be crossed. She would not have sex with her clientele. And that she would give the occasional private dance. She worked at some bachelor parties. She did a couple of things for some bachelor parties. She did also give massages. She gave nude massages, and it was said that for every piece of clothing that would come off, she would charge more for it. And so that was just what she did. And this was in her office where she had all of her Pampered Chef products. So a lot of people thought that this was her office for her Pampered Chef. But at nighttime is when she would bring out this masseuse table and she would give massages. A lot of her friends that didn't know about her double life and they knew that she was learning how to give massages, they didn't think anything of it. It was just another thing that they thought she was just learning how to do it so she could give regular massages to people. They didn't know that it went a step further. And it was said that Ron Biegler did know about her escort business. And he said in an interview that he talked to Paige about it and he expressed his concerns that this can be a very, very dangerous situation. And she thought it was a good idea because at the time there was this oil boom in the area and there was not enough adult entertainment, so she thought that she had the upper hand, that she would be able to make even more money doing this. However, with all that being said, we have not talked about Rob Dixon at all, so this is a part where I'm going to mention him a little bit. Investigators looked into Rob Dixon, especially after they found out about the 911 calls. They knew about the charges that were filed against him, the anger management that he had to go through. And there was also an online forum that was for Pampered Chef. Now, I don't know if this was for all of Pampered Chef or if this was just for Paige's team or her group of people. That I'm not 100% sure of. But she would go on to talk in that forum that she was very concerned for her safety, that she was worried that Rob was going to end up killing her, and she was worried about how her children would feel if anything were to happen to her. So of course, this was something that was really worrisome. And at this point in time, her father and her mother, they did find out about this forum, so they were a little concerned. But Rob did say that he was not in Grand Junction at all. He was all the way in Philadelphia. He was at home in Pennsylvania. He did have a solid alibi because investigators would look into cell phone records. They found that the night and the time that Paige had gone missing and everything of that nature, that his cell phone did ping off of a cell phone tower in Pennsylvania. So they ruled him out as a person of interest because of the fact that they did have this evidence that showed he was not in Colorado at the time of her disappearance. Now we're going to move on to some more people because, of course, once they found out that Paige was acting as Carrie and that she had this double life, they were able to obtain a ton of cell phone records and a ton of information about her clientele. So there were a bunch of clients that were questioned, and we're going to go over a few of them right now. Some of these people, they did testify in court as well. So the first person was someone by the name of John. He was a ranch hand, and he had called Paige the night that she disappeared. And he was the one that said, "This is John at the Motel 6, just wondering if you're coming out or not." She never called back, obviously, and she never showed up. The next client that was on the list to be questioned and a person of interest was Wayne D'Amico. And he was a car salesman. The reason why he was questioned, besides just being a client of Paige's, was a call girl had overheard a joke that he had made saying that if it was him, if he was the one who killed Paige, he would put her in a wood chipper to dispose of the body. This particular call girl would end up testifying in court as well, and she did say that she usually has really good intuition, and that when she heard this joke, she called police because she was really concerned. She did eventually say that she was under the influence of some kind of substances at the time of this, but again, Wayne did admit to making this joke, and he did say that he wished he didn't make this joke because it was wrong, and he didn't even know why he said it. He was ruled out at one point. Then there was another client whose name was Stephen Heald, and he embezzled $17,000 to purchase Pampered Chef products, but he was actually using this for sex. At first, he said that Paige was blackmailing him to hide their relationship, but then he changes his story later on and says that she had never blackmailed him and that their relationship was mutual. His wife would also testify, saying that he did have a solid alibi because the night that Paige went missing, they were together. He was nowhere near Paige or anything like that, that he was at home with his wife. Next up, we have George Coraluzzo. He was a client of Paige's, and he called Paige 20 times the night that she went missing, and he had a past of theft, burglary, and a DUI. The issue with George was he told one of his friends 2 days after Paige had gone missing that he had to leave town right away because his family had been killed in a terrible car accident, but his friend ended up looking up all this information and found out that this was a lie. His friend said that he was in a panic and that she really truly thought that he was responsible for Paige's disappearance and eventually the murder of Paige. She really, really, truly thought, because it was just everything was just completely out of the ordinary, and none of it made sense. George Coraluzzo would end up drowning in a river in New Jersey in 2011. Now we're going to move on to a client that originally went by the name Jim. However, investigators would find out that this person was Lester Ralph Jones. Lester Jones had made 5 phone calls to Paige the night that she had gone missing from a track phone that he purchased at a local Walmart. Investigators would find out that about a year earlier, Lester did pay Paige $400 for a service of some sort. He said that it was a massage and that she was topless. Lester did make an appointment with Paige the day before she went missing. However, because she was really concerned that he knew what her true identity was at this point, she had asked her friend and babysitter Carol if she could go there instead and kind of feel out the situation a little bit. Carol did end up going to Paige's office with Lester. She said that she was very terrified because he was 6'5", so he was a really big guy. And she said that it was almost like he was obsessed with Paige, that he knew everything about her, that he knew who she was. So of course, Paige's suspicions were correct. And once they started looking into Lester a little bit further, he had priors. He had been convicted of kidnapping and assaulting his first wife, along with, at one point there was somewhere I read a story that he went after her and her male friend and shot at them, or shot at the guy, and it missed the guy. So everyone was fine, but it like just missed his hat. So he did have priors, and Lester would be brought in for questioning because there was a lot of suspicious activity with him. Investigators found out that his second wife was out of town the night that Paige went missing. He did not have an alibi and admitted to leaving his home between the hours of 9 and 10 p.m. when Paige's last phone calls were made to and from her cell phone. During the 2.5 hours of questioning, he does agree to give investigators fingerprints of his DNA and the keys to his truck. The keys to his truck part, there's something that I do want to mention, because Paige's friend Carol would go on to later say that there was an incident a few nights before, or a few weeks before, that Paige had been leaving her office at nighttime. There was a mysterious white pickup truck that had come to her office building, and Paige would end up telling Carol that she was very shooken up about this. It was very scary and it was very random. And Paige did not know who was behind the wheel of this white pickup truck or anything like that, and that was the only time that she had seen this white pickup truck. And this is important to note because Lester Jones did drive a white Dodge pickup truck. Another thing that they found was, because Lester was 6'4", he was the perfect height to be the person that was sitting in the driver's seat in Paige's car when they found the car up in flames, and they saw that the seat was all the way back. He also worked right across the street from where Paige's car had been found up in flames. They did bring in the canine unit to see if they could find something, and this led them to finding Lester's scent in the driver's seat. So not only is he 6'4", he's tall enough to be in that front seat, but they also found his scent there. The dogs that they brought in found a scent of a dead body in the trunk. While Lester was in questioning, investigators went to his workspace and they were able to find a ton of evidence. There was notes about sex workers, there was notes about their bra sizes, about different positions that they were willing to do with him. He had a bunch of Viagra pills, there was a black Victoria's Secret bra, he had a ton of wigs. Another piece of evidence that they did find, I forgot to mention this while I was filming, but they found a kitchen scale in his belongings as well that was from Pampered Chef. And as I talked about earlier in the video, Paige was a Pampered Chef MLM rep. So this was another suspicious item that they found amongst his things. And they found a few other very interesting things. There was a gas can that was at his workspace, and there was the packaging for a track phone. When they tracked down the serial number, they tracked it down to the Walmart, and they looked at the security footage. The surveillance footage showed that Lester Jones had bought that phone. Later on, there was one of the district attorneys. He did talk about how Lester changed his story a bunch of times. First, he said that he didn't buy the track phone. Then he said that he was only at Walmart to buy a soda. Then he said that he was only there to buy a Monster cable. So his story changed quite a number of times. But because he worked as a mechanic for an RV park, the investigators had asked owners of the park, why would he have a gas can? Is this something that is normal? And they said no, there's no reason for him to have a gas can at his workspace. That's really strange, and that's not something that he needs to have at his workspace. However, because there was no body, unfortunately they did have to release Lester because the evidence that they had was circumstantial. There was nothing that was linking him to Paige's murder or her disappearance. They had no body, so there was no way for them to be able to charge him right then and there. A lot of people might ask, well, what about dogs. They had the scent of the dead body in the trunk and then the scent of him in the driver's seat. But the problem with dogs is some people, it doesn't really hold up in court all the time because you can't cross-examine a dog. And some people will argue the accuracy of them and everything. So that's something that I did want to mention. Lester would be questioned by investigators more than just this one time. And there was, at one point, he did have an interrogation. After that interrogation, he was, I don't know if he was nervous or what the case was, but he ended up trying to take his own life. And right after, he was okay. He made it, but after all of this had happened, he got a phone call from the police station, and they had told him that we're releasing the car to you, and because they actually seized 2 cars, so they're releasing 2 of the cars back to him, and that they could just take the car, and that's that. But the conversation took a very eerie and weird turn.
If you need us to bring one to you or come and pick one of you up, we can do that for you.
I don't think so.
Mr. Jones, I'm not following you.
You asked me where I would bury a body.
I'm sorry?
You asked me where I could bury a body.
When did I ask you that?
Was this some kind of a premature confession or whatever the case may be? We don't know. Was he just really out of it from what he had tried to do? Possibly. On March 6th of 2012, some hikers had found some human remains in Wells Gulch area in Delta County, and this was approximately 60 miles south of Grand Junction where Paige lived. They were able to identify the skull as Paige Bergfeld by dental records. They found that the skull had a really bad, severe fracture in the cheekbone that they thought happened either at or before time of death. There was duct tape around the jawline, which investigators would go on to say that this would lead them to believe that she was gagged and that she was tied up. The rest of her remains were found along this area. They were able to find more of her remains. Now that they had Paige's skeletal remains, they were able to investigate even further. More people were questioned. They were able to go through some more evidence. And finally, right before Thanksgiving in November of 2014, Lester Jones would be arrested for the murder of Paige Bergfeld. His bail was set to $2 million. Investigators said that when they went to arrest him, he seemed fine. He didn't react at all. It was as if nothing, it's almost as if he knew what he was being arrested for. And his trial would start in September of 2016. His wife would later testify that the day that Paige's car went up in flames, he told her he was going back to the RV shop because he had forgotten to turn off the lights, but it was speculated that this was the time that Lester decided to set the car on fire. Then his other wife, his first wife, talked about how in the late 90s, Lester had kidnapped her at gunpoint and said he was going to kill her and no one would find her. She was able to escape, and Lester served 5 years in prison for that particular crime. And the jury came back, it was 9-3, so it was not unanimous. This in turn caused for a mistrial, and prosecutors would go on to say that they thought maybe the jury was judging Paige a little bit too much for her double life, that they were almost looking at her in a different light instead of looking at her as a victim and a person. That's what prosecutors were trying to say. But within 2 months after the first trial ended is when the second trial would start. Lester Jones's defense team was trying to make up this story, and they were trying to attempt to pin the murder on George Coraluzzo, who had drowned back in 2011. But this plan would in turn not work out in their favor because eventually Lester Jones would admit to killing Paige, and he was convicted. In November of 2016, almost 10 years after her disappearance, He was convicted for the murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree and second degree kidnapping, and was given life without the possibility of parole. He never explained his motive. We can only speculate at this point, but he is sitting behind bars right where he deserves to be sitting. Paige's children are now, they're closer with their father, with Rob Dixon, and they did end up moving to the East Coast to Philadelphia. Her oldest daughter was 8 years old at the time of Paige's disappearance, and by the time that Lester was convicted, her oldest had graduated from high school. But her children would go on to say that they're glad that they were finally able to get closure, but that they'll never forget that their mother was just trying to do whatever she possibly could. I did just want to say that I hope that nobody passes judgment on Paige because of her double life, because the thing that bothers me is that I've seen this a lot where people automatically think of sex workers or escorts or anything like that less than as a victim, rather than trying to get justice for this particular victim. So I did just want to say that please don't pass judgment on her. This was just, in my opinion, this was just a mom who was just trying to put food on the table. If we look at other videos that I've covered or other cases that I've covered here on this channel, there are plenty of them out there that go after sex workers because there is this stigma, and I guess it's easy for them because they're, one, an easy target. The sex industry is a very, very dangerous industry, and I feel like it almost comes with the territory knowing that you can possibly get hurt. And that's the reason why so many times when a sex worker goes missing, I feel as though it's not investigated as thoroughly or as quickly as possible because, like I've said already, there's a stigma, and that's just my opinion. But I hope that Paige is resting in peace, and I hope that her family is doing better. I hope that they're able to just go through life and be able to remember their mother for the incredible person that she was. So with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye.